As we begin this panel discussion, has anyone here heard of HeforShe? Everyone's heard of HeforShe, right? Are you sure? Are you sure? Everyone? No? Okay, if you have not heard for HeforShe, at the end of this panel, I'm going to give you a challenge. Go sign up for HeforShe. All right? But what is HeforShe? HeforShe was created in 2014 by the United Nations Women, the United Nations Entity for Gender Equality and Empowerment of Women. And this HeforShe solidarity movement for gender equality provides a systematic approach and targeted platform where a global audience can engage and become change agents for the achievement of gender equality in our lifetime. What we saw from Susanna's speech is, have we reached gender equality? We have not. We're far from it, right? But there have been steps positively in the future. So what we're going to ask our panelists is, we're going to discuss this HeforShe movement and how women, men, how other stakeholders, how organizations can help us move forward. Because what we know is, if we have gender equality, that's not only good for women, it's not only good for men, but it's going to be good for our world. And this is what we want in the future. Okay? So we're going to start by having our panelists sort of share their experiences in terms of their path towards where they are today for the women speakers and what has helped facilitate their success. Okay? So why don't we start with Carrie?
I started a movement within the fashion industry called Role Models, Not Runway Models, where everyone who walks my runway is a famous CEO or executive or incredible woman in lieu of traditional models. Because what happened to me when I was younger, I grew up in the United States, is I would open all these magazines and I would see all these women who I felt didn't look like me or who I didn't associate with, but I wanted to be like, but it felt really detached and demotivating. And what I realized as I grew older is, when I was young, I was looking up to the wrong models, literally. And what I needed to see was more role models. Which is a great quote that I love, is, if she can see it, she can be it. And we see so, as women, so few different archetypes of what we can be. And just understanding that I saw a very limited archetype when I was growing up made me very, very, very passionate about making sure that young women like yourself can see more amazing women like this in places that you look all the time, like fashion and beauty.
Thank you. Let's move on to Veronica. Maybe Veronica can share her experience.
Hi, it's a really great pleasure to come back. Actually, I have a special tie with CEIBS. I did my EMBA 17 years ago here. So it's really a pleasure to come back. And I'm a Shanghai local. I was born and grew up here and worked here. I got my family here, so I'm a really Chinese woman, authentic. So for the topic, I think, like Susanna said, the silence hero, or the invisibility, which is the area I have a very true personal touch and insight. I think as for he, for she, I think if you are a male in a leadership position and you have teams of women working for you, I think it's one key role you can play is really, like my former boss played, is really to encourage. Because when we think about taking an expanded role, responsibilities, when I was got assignment, actually I asked to move from Shanghai to London, UK in 2006. And actually I was a little bit, hesitated. And my boss said, "You are ready." I said, "Not yet." My boss said, "You are ready." And I said, "Not yet." So the fear of not yet is really powerful, because it's kind of limiting you, take up the first step. And finally, after my boss continuously encouraged me and said, "You are ready," I'm ready, and I go. And it's good. It's a really good experience, and I'm really happy that I made that decision. And it's really good. So that's my story.
Thank you so much. So Veronica has said, a male boss has encouraged her and helped give her, the encouragement to say, you're ready to take the next step. So I'm going to switch it up a little bit, and we're going to get to Sarah, but we're going to turn to Adrian, because Adrian manages, is owner of many restaurants in the food and beverage industry. So as a male boss, how do you make sure, or how do you ensure that you develop the right women leaders?
Step one is how to, it's on? Okay. All right. For me, and this is a corporate value that my company has always espoused, it starts with education. We have one of our core values, and we've actually borrowed it from another organization, but it's called Better Leaders Through Education and Idea Exchange. So I think one of my responsibilities as a male in the industry is to make sure that I'm offering education opportunities across the board. And in this case, it has to be specifically focused towards women, because they are the ones who, at this point, are falling through the cracks. We have very specific, targeted educational programs that we think are addressing some of the structural, corporate, and individual lackings that women seem to be falling into. Professor Susanna mentioned earlier negotiation as something that men are theoretically better at than women. I'm here to tell you that men and women suck equally. They suck terribly at negotiation. They really need help on both sides. Although there is one difference, and Susanna actually nailed it earlier when she said ask. The one difference that we see between men and women is women seem less likely to ask. And when they do ask, they seem less likely to be specific about what that ask is. I can quote statistics. There's one of my favorite negotiators, her name is Victoria Medvec. She's a professor at Kellogg University. I highly recommend everybody in this room to look her up, especially you guys are all going to go out into the workforce. She will make sure that your starting package, not your starting salary, but your starting package is going to be a lot higher than it would have been otherwise. But at any rate, we try very hard to make sure that we are offering plenty of education opportunities for the women in our company to make themselves better leaders.
Thank you. So let's return and let's ask Sarah to describe your experience and how you've become successful.
Sure. Well, my background is in consumer products, as you mentioned, and I've spent the last 10 years in the innovation space. And what I have experienced very clearly is that innovation is driven by diversity of perspectives. You cannot have a whole room full of people that think the same way and get to a breakthrough solution. It just doesn't work that way. So I think probably coming from the innovation background is what inspired AmCham to ask me to help them build a pipeline of women leaders. And that's how WEN came about. Our focus is to help these women, senior level women, go the last mile, and it was to get them to the AmCham board or other boards and help them to rise to the C-suite if they weren't already there. But once we became a committee, we had to run a conference according to the chamber. And I thought, oh gosh, a women's conference. Women talking to women about our problems and really not getting anywhere. So I said, I'm tired of talking to women about our problems. We need to be talking to men. So I said, okay, we're gonna call this conference HeforShe. And it came about from researching the UN Women's Program. But we have since innovated, surprise, surprise. We are now no longer talking about he for she, we are talking about we for she. And that is because it's not just men who will help us, it's women who need to help other women. And that has been my inspiration for setting up WEN. I suppose, fortunately, I was educated at a women's college, so the notion of women having the power to deliver change, women having the ability to contribute has always been in the back of my mind. Thanks.
How about we ask Jonathan to say a few words about how this has been created and how we, maybe not just he, right, but how we can help women's leadership develop in the future.
First of all, it's a great pleasure to be here with everyone. This is my second time speaking at CEBS as well. So it's a great honor. And before I start my conversation, let me ask the audience a question. How many of you have heard the firm called Heidrick & Struggles? Okay, so maybe 10% of the audience. Let me make a quick introduction about the industry. Heidrick & Struggles is one of the top 5 executive search firms in the world. If there are 5,000 search firms on the market, 4,995 are contingency firms. There are 5 firms globally need a retainer. So the 5 firms called retained search firm is called the top 5, global top 5. Heidrick is the #1 firm of the global top 5 firm. So you can imagine what we do for a living. I read people for a living. I meet on average 400 executives every year, new people. So reading people, meeting people is my daily job. I was born and raised in Beijing, but I was educated in the US since high school. After my undergrad, I've been living and working in China and the US back and forth for 3 times. My first job actually was with the US Air Force. I was executive officer for Major General Lupia, civil engineer for the Air Force for 4 years. So I have a very, very in-depth knowledge and understanding of the culture of both sides. Diversity, women leadership, is a term you hear in the US. It's slowly evolving in China because in China, when we were growing up in China, we never thought the inequality of male and female because since when I was little in elementary school, even in kindergarten, the slogan was, women hold up the half the sky, right? The earlier introduction, Adrian shared, I'm leading the life science and government affairs practice for Heidrick in Greater China region. I'm also the Beijing office leader. I can tell you, I'm the only male in Beijing office. And out of the top 22 pharmaceutical companies globally that are operating in China, 8 country presidents are female. And out of the top 10 medical device companies, I placed the first female leaders last year. That's the Alcon Laboratory. So I have been a big champion of women leaders in the market, in our industry. I just don't want not just talking about it. I'm actually taking action every day. So.
Thank you.
Can I just ask you that I hope you help these women go from CEO of China to a global role? Help them make that leap because you're a global firm?
I think Susanna was talking about, the women leaders on the board level, right? But if you really take a look at our market, how many multinational companies have their board coming from China? 0.
0. And hopefully that was actually the impetus for setting up WEN. Hopefully the rest of the world will realize that global multinationals, every global multinational needs someone from China on their global executive board. And then we'll have a pool of board-ready women waiting for them.
Yep, so I fully agree. But we have to do something about the domestic POEs first, right? If you take a look at Alibaba, you take a look at Tencent, so the frontline leaders are always a male. But there is always a strong woman behind them, right? So actually the woman is calling the shot behind the scene. So
no, she's doing the work.
Yeah, yeah.
Usually.
But she's collecting the money, right?
So thank you so much for jumping in. I think this is what makes the panel interesting. But what we're going to do is we're going to look at barriers, the issues that are stopping, executive level leaders from moving up to the board level, as we saw that's a problem in China. So we'll be discussing that a bit later on in the panel. I want to go to Christy and give her a chance to introduce herself.
Hi, good morning. I'm very excited and very passionate about the subject. I think I'm going to steal a bit of a page from Susanna and Jonathan's book to say a little bit about myself, to give a little bit of context and color around my vision about the HeforShe movement. I'm originally from Texas, via London to Hong Kong. I've been in Hong Kong for 22 years. I'm a very proud graduate of the University of Hong Kong, and I'm a Hong Kong solicitor first. I'm a UK solicitor, and I am not US qualified. So that puts slightly in perspective my journey. But the HeforShe movement, I guess I was born into a little bit. My grandmother, in fact, was born in the 1890s. She didn't get married until she was 30 because she was out pursuing a career. My mother was a little bit a chip off the old block, as they say. My mother basically was born in 1929, and she had me when she was 41. So I think the kind of role model I think that they provided was invaluable, and the success and the pathway that they led for me to say, do what you want to do, be what you want to be. I, in fact, had, I think, the opposite problem of many of you here. I was told I could do anything, I could go anywhere, you just had to believe it and do it yourself and believe in yourself, which was a great thing until I was probably pretty young on the playground and people were telling me, oh, Christy, you can't do that, you're a girl. And I said, well, I'm going to have to go back and tell my mother and my grandmother on you because this is absolutely not correct. They told me I could do anything. And so with that, I think just to round this topic off, I think those of you who think because you stay at home with children, you take some time off, that there's not a role to play, I would beg to differ.
Thank you. So, in our discussion so far, we've talked about education being a key enabler for women leadership. We talked about how do we move from maybe a regional role to more of a global role in the executive. Let's turn to Alan and ask him about what's happening in the academic world globally, what's happening in the United States on this topic.
So I'm going to be like most politicians and say that's a great question, but then I'm going to answer a different one. Is that all right? So first a question. How many of you have stayed in a hotel and seen signs in the room indicating that other people like you don't throw their towels on the floor and they hang them up to save the world? Any of you seen those signs? All right, a lot of that work is credited to a social psychologist by the name of Robert Cialdini, who's done a lot of work trying to figure out how to influence people to do the right thing. And one of his findings is that you convince people that other people who are like you are doing the right thing. So why is it important for we, she to be involved? Because the reality is when we want people to change their behavior, they get really defensive when someone else who's different points their finger at them. So if we all want more women involved in appropriate roles, well, appropriate roles didn't come out right. Appropriately involved in roles, and that didn't come out right either. Just strike that. If we want the right thing to happen, we need men to convince other men to behave appropriately, right? Nobody likes being told what to do, so it's a sales job. The second thing I would like to say that you didn't ask me is to explain why I care about this stuff.
Sure.
So, Susanna, I was not born in the 60s. I was born in 59. So that means I got together with my romantic partner long ago. It was 1985. We were of different religions, and we both brought our religious person to do part of the ceremony. The person I brought had been involved in the civil rights movement in the United States in the 1960s, and he had seen Martin Luther King Jr., who was an American civil rights activist, on the Sunday before he was killed on a Thursday. My friend was a minister, and he had been to the I Have a Dream speech. He was very involved in the movement. And he was explaining to my wife and me, or fiancé and me, because we weren't quite married yet, in the ceremony, why the rope of life, we would be tied together. The first knot in that rope of life was our physical attraction for each other. Now, I was 25 years old. I still don't remember the second knot. I really don't. But he got to the third knot, I remembered. And he said that when he went to Reverend King's presentation in the National Cathedral in Washington on that Sunday before he was killed, he was speaking to white ministers, and he said to them, I cannot be all that I can be until you are all that you ought to be, but you can't be all that you can be until I am all that I can be. And I took that to heart, that in order for me to be successful and for my wife to be successful, I had to promote her life, if not more importantly than mine. And I think that's the way a lot of men, we women feel. It's just the right thing to do. That's what humanity is about. And that's not really what you asked. So I apologize.
So I think we can all take a cue from Alan. You don't have to answer my questions. You can just say what you think is important and was informative to the audience, right?
Wait, can I build on that a second? We had a panel at my conference last week about why there aren't more women on the global conference stages. And it comes back, actually, you've just demonstrated this point perfectly, and I hope that the women out there can learn from it. One of the PR executives said, it's because women always think they need to be perfectly prepared to get up there on stage. And I said, from the first panels that I organized, I remember being unable to get the male senior executives to prep for the panel. They wouldn't come to the calls, and they would just show up, and I'd be like, oh my gosh, how's this panel gonna go? And I soon came to understand that men come to these stages with a message that they want to deliver, regardless of what the question is. But women need to do that too. So don't worry about being prepared, just get up on the stage. Showing up.
Sorry, I just wanted to step in for 1 second. Only because I still think preparation is really important for most things in life. I'm not trying to disagree, because actually we're not really talking about the exact same thing. However, I mentioned earlier that men suck at negotiation. It's because they don't prepare. It's the exact same reason. Women actually come much more prepared to a negotiation to talk about not just one specific topic, but a broad range of issues. And men seem to just say, I'm gonna wing it on my personality, and I'm gonna use my charm and my charisma, and it really doesn't work. Because if you're facing somebody who really knows their stuff, they're gonna wipe the floor with you. Right. So I just wanted to caution everybody. What you're saying is also right, but if you can prepare.
We had a workshop on negotiating contracts, and in fact, the lawyer, Leslie Legorner, made a point of saying that she has almost no female clients because women take their employment contract and they sign it. They do not go to see somebody to think about how to negotiate it because they don't want to be seen as difficult. So you're absolutely right. Women do need to negotiate. You do need to do your homework, but I was just talking about getting up on a stage.
Just a quick experience I want to share with everyone. My first training after I joined the Air Force is called media training. The media training is when the camera is rolling, when the lights are shining on your face, how do you react? So long story short, the message was, regardless of what kind of question they're asking you, regardless of what kind of lights they put on you, you repeat the same message over and over again.
So speaking of preparation, I did prepare for this. Well, I got the questions in advance. But there was something when I was looking and thinking about this panel, and there's a story that I did want to share. So I've been very involved in feminism since I don't even remember. I studied women's studies in college at UCLA. It's now called gender studies, which is more modern. But I was also very involved in the Women's March in DC, and I was on my way to the Women's March, and I was talking to my parents, and my dad gets on the phone. He's like, I don't know about this feminism stuff. I was like, oh, okay. And I was like, can you explain to me, Dad, why? Why are you not so sure about this feminism stuff? And he's like, it's for everyone, everyone's equal. And I said, I agree. Can I tell you the dictionary definition of feminism, and you can tell me if you're a feminist or not? He said, okay. So I said, it's political, social, and economic equality for men and women. He's like, I can get on board with that. I was like, can I count you in as a feminist? He's like, yeah. So I think what the problem is with the feminism term it has a bad brand at this point. And what I love about HeforShe is it's about equality. And right now, and what you discussed, Alan, is rising tide lifts all ships. And when we're working together and for each other, it's actually not a zero-sum game. You know, I get some, you get less. It's actually we all rise together. And that's what I like to talk about when we're talking about equality, is that it's not less for you, more for me. It's about all of us rising together. And if somebody's questioning feminism, just tell them to look at the dictionary.
Thank you. So I do want to get us back on track, and maybe you guys can have, answer questions related to this, maybe a little bit, right? But I want us to think about what are some concrete ways that we can really deal with gender inequality, right? Because as statistics show, it exists. And as Carrie has said, I agree, I think it's bad for the world. This is not going to be something that helps lift the boat if this continues. So what are some barriers that women face, and what can we, right, not only males, but organizations, maybe even countries, what can be done to be able to handle and manage this problem? So I'm going to leave it more freestyle, so whoever wants to speak. And
I think for me, it's really, the environment is very important, and people around you are very important. But the most important thing is you. I think leadership is a self-discovery journey. You have to start with who you are and what you're good at and what your passions are, what's your purpose. I think this is really very important. And reflect. I found self-reflect is a really, really important tool in my development. Because I mentioned about the case and also tied to what Susanna just said about the invisible voice, right? We have voice inside, but what are the barriers or what are something stop you to voice out and to speak out? And also not take it for credit, but sometimes you need to do that because you really did this and you're very successful. You have to let people know that what your achievements are. So for me, I think is really start from who you are and what's your your learning and your journey.
I'll jump in as well. I was going to say the next thing I think, because it follows quite well into what Veronica's saying, is about inclusion and also mentoring. I think inclusion, just because that we say, yes, it's important to have equality, but don't expect it just because you're a female. I think there's a little bit on the other side I'd like to say, because we've seen some instances where, especially because I do a lot of fintech work and we have a lot of panels and discussions around it, and people come to me and say, oh, Christy, we need another female on the panel. I'm like, and they said, well, do you know of anybody that can speak on X? And I said, look, it should be about who actually knows the subject matter, not because they happen to be female and they're remotely touching tangentially on the area. So I think that the inclusion aspect is incredibly important. I think that's where the male allies come in. We absolutely need male allies to basically, I think, educate, get us involved, but also to steer us in the directions, maybe because we haven't had sometimes some of the experience that would put us forward in our best way for some of the positions that are there. I think you have to basically say you must have champions, you must have male allies. This is a team sport. And I think it must include the male aspect of the journey. The second point is I'd be really remiss, because I'm a very big and advocate of the mentoring program. I do a lot with the Women's Foundation in Hong Kong, and obviously being a board member of GWC, it's a passion of mine as well. You have to lead by example and actually say something and do something, not just say something. And I think a lot of what we can do is act as mentors. If you're not sure what that entails, go forward. There's no prescribed format for it, but everyone in this room, I'm sure, has experiences that they can share to encourage people to come forward and want to basically be included and to be a part of the journey and basically, as I think Veronica said, in their fulfillment of their lifelong dreams. It's, as I say, it's a personal journey in some respects because you have to decide what you want to do. Someone else isn't going to do it for you, and they shouldn't. But I think once you basically figure out that that's what you want to do, come along for the ride, because there's a lot of us who are very adamant and very passionate about making sure that women are basically given the tools to succeed.
Echoing what Christy just mentioned, when we look at the quality of a leader, we mean from at least personal perspective, I don't see the differences between male and female. I only look at the quality, the capability. So when I look at a leader, I define the leadership quality into 3 categories. First is what I call decency. What's decency? It's integrity, compassion, humility. Second bucket is what I call capabilities. Third is gravitas. The 3 things, I weight them in 50% as a decency, 40% as capabilities. That's come with experiences. 10% gravitas. If you ask me what are some of the key attributes or the differences women leaders make in the mix, and look at it from a different perspective. IQ and EQ, right? What is a fundamental quality of the high EQ? In my definition, is sensitivity. Second is caring. So the women's leaders have a higher EQ because they have a higher sensitivity and they care more, which come back to the point of decency. The second point of decency is compassion, caring for others. But come down to the overall picture. You're going to be successful in at least from your career perspective, it's not only your male or female. It's more of the combination of quality.
I don't want to directly challenge that, but I just want to kind of add some more flavor to this because, look, I think this is also specifically why this is such a challenging topic. Let me just share an example because when I was listening to what you were saying, it made me think of this. This was actually a friend of mine at Nielsen's. She's one of the managing directors there. And we were talking about this because I was preparing for this panel. So I was trying to get some perspective. And so she shared this story. She said, look, we actually have 2 people competing for the same job, senior management level. One is male, one is female, more or less equally qualified on paper. But they were looking at productivity, right? And they found that the male candidate was significantly more productive than the female. They did a little digging before they made the final decision on who to promote. What it came down to was she was solely responsible for taking care of their one child. She was married and she had a kid. So she had to go and take care of this kid. Every single time there was a doctor's appointment, every single time there was some parent-teacher conference, she was solely responsible. Her husband never took that responsibility. That was just a family decision. Ultimately, so my friend, in her position as a female leader, she was at a loss. She said, how do I curve for that? Because on paper, I have a responsibility to the company to say, okay, performance is the issue. And by the way, I'm sharing this. I don't have an answer for this. But this is one of the reasons why this topic is so challenging. Because from my perspective also, as an employer, as a CEO, as a business leader, these things happen in my company as well. I mean, I hate to say this, but we actually do. I mean, I'm really shooting myself in the foot here, but in full disclosure, we have found across the board that our female employees are in fact underpaid compared to our male employees. And it's something that we are really trying to address. We are really trying to take steps to figure that out. And that's why I was talking about ask. That's why I was talking about, we put on so much emphasis on negotiations, because we have found, and this is across continents, by the way, this is global, that one of the main reasons is women don't ask for raises as often as men. Women don't ask for the promotion as often. They don't ask for the roles and responsibilities. How do you combat that, right? Education is something I've talked about. at the risk of rambling, at any rate, I just wanted to throw that out there because this topic is really not so simple. It seems to me, anyway. It's got layers and layers and layers. I mean, I'd love to hear from other panelists about that.
I think Adrian has a great question, right? So what do we do, right? Is it the environment? Do we change the environment? Or is, mentoring, that's a great solution, but is that enough? Can we do more?
It's got to be.
So let me just say that for the nursery thing that we had mentioned, Nielsen has implemented for the child thing that I had mentioned, they implemented a nursery program to try to address that. So there are solutions, but at any rate.
I think it's a combination of factors, and I think it's what you were talking about, Veronica, about taking responsibility for yourself and knowing yourself, and a lot of it is about courage and confidence. That courage and confidence is also nurtured by mentoring and by colleagues and parents. When we were talking about this presence on stages, I set up a WeChat group called She Speaks, because I got tired of people basically saying we couldn't find the woman. They'll always come to me. I need a woman speaker on X. Oh, why do you have an all-male panel, a manel? Because we couldn't find one. We could not find a woman to speak on the panel. That to me is ridiculous. So I thought, okay, let's try to figure out how to solve for this. So I put up this WeChat group. And I have hundreds of women who scan the QR code because they say they want to speak about something, but then they don't fill out the application. Fill out the application to let us know what are you capable and confident to speak about. So it's partially it's up to you, ladies, to step up and put yourself out there. Get over the fear, get a bit of courage, encourage each other, and then we will have some change. All it takes is for someone to see another woman up there.
So I want to finish with, because we're running out of time, so I want to finish with one last question, right? We've talked a lot about mentorship. We've talked a lot about how maybe women have to think, we have to put themselves out there, have confidence to do this. But obviously, when we look at the statistics, the environment is tilted against women, right? There are factors in the environment that are not beneficial to women. So how do we deal with these difficulties in the environment? Any solutions, any suggestions, any comments on that question?
I'll let Dr. Allen go.
No, you go for it.
I was just say, I think the momentum is building, and I think we've got a very positive momentum. So I think, unfortunately, the Me Too movement kind of took away for the great strides that we had for the HeforShe, and I'm not saying good or bad, but I think, unfortunately, it did take away some of the momentum. We have balance for better this year, and inclusion and diversification in kind of who, I think it was mentioned earlier, thanks for all the males showing up today. The Women's Foundation, when we used to have our International Women's Day celebration, we used to have 400 of, a ballroom full of women. And now this year, I'm very pleased. You've got a very balanced, I think, attendance. And I think it's not just because people are saying, wow, I think we need to get on board. I think they do believe it needs to actually have inclusion with the male allies. And it has been a movement in and of itself, is gathering male allies to support women's functions. So I think where I would start it off by saying is the momentum's building. I think we're in a really great space. I think it's up to everyone. And I always say it's incumbent on all of us, not just myself or those up here on the panel, to encourage others to continue. But I mean, I think it's a matter of what you make it and how you want it to kind of find its way. Hong Kong, as Susanna said, it's got only 14% women on boards. I have no idea why. That's absolutely abysmal for Hong Kong, and I'm usually the person up here jumping and screaming, yay, Hong Kong. On this one, I have to say, why Hong Kong? I don't understand. But I think with focus and with the energy moving forward and the positive movement and the people taking a very conscious behavior to do something about it, there will be change. I'm very, very hopeful. I'm very positive about this.
Can I just add, I'm very hopeful as well in terms of I get a definite sense of momentum. I would not say that the Me Too movement was negative. I think the Me Too movement actually was about vulnerability and courage and women supporting women to speak up. And yes, we have had a tremendous sea change in corporates talking about policies, diversity and inclusion. I guess I'm looking for the term, with the green movement, we had greenwashing. I'm not sure what the term is when everyone talks about D&I and their websites are full of women, role models. It's the I that's missing. So if we can work on that inclusion, maybe these policies will make a difference. But I do feel like there is a momentum, and I'm hopeful.
From our perspective, at least in the multinational life science companies, country heads, I shared with you, 8 out of 22 top pharma companies, country heads are female. But if you look at the layer below, country -1, 70–80% of that layer's leaders are all female. So some of the male country heads came to me, asked me, can I help them to find some male leaders for their management team? Okay, so it's I'm not sure it's a certain sector or a certain industry, but there's a few things I would like to recommend to the ladies in the audience. To me, I share with you the sensitivity, the caring part is in your natural strength. Okay, so to have a successful career, to have a successful life, you need to have a balance. Balance between family and career. Also, the other side is women are at disadvantage, as Adrian mentioned, because there's greater responsibilities on the family front. But don't try to overreach to the other side. I mean, we see some women try to act like men. No. That is it shows your weakness. It shows your insecurity. Just that.
I ran a media panel last week, and there were 2 examples that I gave, Angela Merkel and Ginny Rometty. And Ginny Rometty was the first female CEO of IBM in over 100 years, and they made virtually no mention of the fact that she was a woman. Angela Merkel has been one of the most powerful leaders in history, and the New York Times, the IHT, the big question was, is she a feminist? Because she never advanced policies for women, she never cited the fact that she was a woman, so what is that telling us? I mean, I heard your point, but those are 2 very successful women, and they did not necessarily behave like women.
I think it's a really great challenge. Let's face the reality, because if you look at the report, I just heard that the workforce of the Chinese workforce, the women workforce, is 76 or 80%, right? We are the world #1. But let's look at the numbers that we have for the managerial or senior leadership or the board level. We still have a long way to go, a long way to go. I think, yes, we need to educate, we need to mentor, we need to coach, we need to shape the environment. But sometimes at this stage, if we want to close such a big gap, we need some mechanism and we need some systems to push that, because we cannot just do it by individuals. So let's look at the corporate. I currently worked with one of my clients, and they are a multinational company, and they have huge operations in China. So they got me in and say that they have a huge debate because the headquarters say that we will cascade down the quota system. The quota system. It's a dramatic change, and they have huge resistance from the management. Of course, people say they cannot do this because of this, they cannot do this because of that. But I worked with the management. I said that if you want to measure something, you have to have a goal. If you don't have a goal, they say, well, we will improve from this year to next year. But if you don't have a specific goal, how can you manage? Maybe at this stage, we do need the quota system for this environment at this stage. I mean, at this stage, if things evolve, we may change, right? So actually, I asked them, they have a huge sales operation. They have a lot of sales reps, the majority of their workforce, and a lot of them are female. I said, did you look at the data? Let's compare your performance with the female sales rep and the male sales rep. Let the data talk. And when you promote the sales managers, the sales directors, if you really look at the performance, you cannot double standard because you say, well, we only look at the capability, the performance, the result. Then you say, well, they have family issues, they need to take off time, and they have inconveniences for us. So I still think we need a mechanism in corporations or organizations to drive this if we want to close the huge gap.
Make it a KPI, accountability.
All right, so I think we have a few minutes left. I want to open it up and be a bit more interactive. So if anyone in the audience has any questions for the panel or a specific individual in the panel, you can open it up that way.
Come on, ladies.
Yes, up there. We'll give you a microphone.
So thank you all very much for your presence here and also for your candidness. One of you mentioned that you did an analysis of your company and discovered that women are paid less than men, and there's this pay gap. And then the moderator asked, how can we do things to solve these issues? And the predominant solution that I heard was women need to ask more. And maybe it's true that women ask less, but I'm not sure if the fundamental problem is that women ask less. It also puts the onus on women to just say like, oh, just ask men to give you more and they'll give you more. And I feel like that's really unfair. And based on my personal experience, I think also there's a different reflection towards women who do ask for more and a different interpretation by management. So women who do ask for more can look like they're acting like men, or they can look undercommitted, or like they don't have the compassion piece and they're not caring enough. And so I'm wondering if there's any nuance that you could add to that piece of advice. How can we ask better? How can we ask in a way that's not impersonating men, but also shows that we care, but also shows that we understand the breadth of the issue? It's a hard question, but thanks for any feedback.
I might take a stab at it, although it wasn't about me. But I was going to mention I have no way, shape, or form any alliance with Nike. But if you've seen the recent Nike advertisements, I think they're brilliant. I mean, they come out and say, we can behave and do the things we need to do to get the job done. If we cry, we're showing emotion, we're too emotional. I personally think that a little bit has to be said. We just don't ask for it. I mean, let's be honest. And there is a bit, it may be a cop-out to say, it's a very two-way street. Because I'm in management, I can't basically read your mind. I basically pay what we think, what we're told by Heidrick and Struggles and lots of other people, what the market average is. We don't look in and say, oh, market average for this position, male, female. There's no such indication about what job should be paid. It's based on lots of different things, and everyone on this panel will tell you it's very subjective and it's super hard. But I would just say kind of getting around the mentality of it and all that. Like I said, look for, and the Women's Foundation has also done a fantastic, kind of similar before Nike came out about, if we cry too much, oh yes, we once had a female on our board, but she was rather emotional. Are you emotional? If you turn the role reversal around and you were saying this as a female to a male, oh, do you get emotional? Oh, exactly. So I think it's incumbent upon all of us to ask. I mean, I think you have to be invested in it. I know it's a two-way street, and it sounds like, oh, well, we should ask. It shouldn't be incumbent on me to do it. But I think there is a little bit in that, or a lot, actually, in my personal opinion. But I think the other thing is, too, is that it's a great time, as I mentioned, because you're seeing a real shift in ideas and what people think is it wrong for university female basketball coach to get upset and rip and throw her jacket on the ground. Is that too emotional? Well, I bet she didn't think so at the time. I don't know who she is actually personally, but it was a great advertisement. And I think actually for anybody thinking about these types of, where we are, where we stand in the kind of momentum and I guess race to getting where we would like to go and the subject, just look at where we're coming from. This was not actually even something 5-10 years ago I could have envisaged that we would have actually made this leap forward.
So I have a very personal experience as it relates to this. So I didn't start in fashion. I started in advertising and sales right after school. And I was like one of the women right after college who got a contract and signed on the line, and having no idea that I could even go and say, oh, I would like this much more. Thinking if I even thought to do that, they'd say, well, you're difficult. Here's another candidate. Little did I know how hard it was to find a good person, much less a good salesperson. And a couple years in, I was the top salesperson and circuitously found out I was being paid the most junior. So I went and created a presentation just like I would have created for one of my clients, but to my bosses, and said, here's how much value I create, here's all the things I've done, here's all the things I'm going to do, like my KPIs, and then this is how much value it is. Like, you have all these costs, here's what I cost. And if you want to keep me, which was doubling my salary. And pretty significant. And they said, well, this is great, we love it, we love what you're doing, but we have a revenue or a salary freeze right now. And I was like, well, then there's going to be a revenue freeze. And and so they did. They doubled my salary and gave me everything I asked for. I'm not going to say it was like seamless or easy or that they loved me for it, but I got it and I saved it and then I started my own company with it. So had I not done that, I think my life would have turned out differently. So sometimes I don't think it's easy. Sometimes it's not easy, but sometimes it's the right thing to do and you have to go to bat for yourself.
Yeah. So I have a different opinion. So I have to be careful. I have to be careful what I say because some of my team members are here. So they don't want to. To me, when I was brought up with the value of that, anything you ask for, they give it to you, it's cheap. Okay. When I was growing up, when I was little, before elementary school, my grandmother always take me for grocery shopping. And I see chocolate in Beijing. I said, I want a chocolate, I want chocolate. My grandmother said, no. So about a few weeks later, I stopped crying, asked for chocolate. Then my grandmother gave it to me. So anything you ask for is cheap. But at the same time, as an organization, as an employer, they need to recognize who are their top talents and reward them and recognize them with the recognition or the value they deserve. So, but what I have found out, majority of the organizations, they do not have that kind of mechanism. Regardless you're men or women, they just do not recognize your value. They don't want to pay you a fair price unless you're asking for it.
And I don't think it's just salary. I think it's things like head counts on teams to deliver. I think it's a range of stuff.
Just very quickly, since it was my company that I think you're talking about. One of the things that we've done, not all companies are evil, by the way. It was not something that we had recognized. And so the way we had taken immediate steps to address it is quite simple. The entry level for the same job, that package, not salary, but the package, an equitable package is the same across genders. We found out that wasn't the case originally. But this is an example of where corporations can actually take some responsibility. I'm not taking any responsibility away from yourself, like everyone else here has shared. At some point, you have to be responsible for yourself. It's like if something bad happens to you in life, you can't go crying to mom and dad. At some point, you take responsibility for your own life. I know that answer probably doesn't sit terribly well with you, and I'm not trying to draw that comparison. What I'm saying is people are trying to work on this situation on both sides. You can take care of yourself. No one else can really do that for you. On the company side, we can try to take care of this corporate/structural issue. I mean, people are trying. It's not easy.
And the last thing I'll say is I do have a fair number of mentees now, and this is a big thing I work with them on, is always asking them what they're making, when they've last asked for a raise, how they're asking for it, and I always talk about money with friends. What I know pretty much what all my friends are making, and I don't know why that's a thing to laugh at. You know, we talk about everything else, and it's an important thing that financial security and financial literacy is one of the most important things in our lifetime. When we talk about health, we also have to talk about financial health, and so. Talk to your friends about, especially if they're in your field, what are they making? What are people, you know, you have to know where you're benchmarking so you can be there or be above it.
So is it very fast? Okay.
I just want to quickly, because it's very important, this is now what Jonathan earlier was brought back point about, do we need to look like them? Because I can quickly use my personal experience, being to go for the first president of the HKICPA, you have to pick a set of a rule of the game. You know, when you go into something, you have to get into the rule of the game. And every game has different rules. That's why I want to say. It doesn't have one set rule. It doesn't like just the boys' rule or the girls' rule. There's different rules of different game, different platform. Now, it's important, first of all, is recognize the rule. Secondly, ask yourself, do you want to be in the game? Because you may like to the game, you know, this is your sweet potato. You can be finding it poison. You know, okay, if you think I want to be in that game, then you have to play the rule. But I hate to say that, but because I'm a cat lover, but there are many ways to skin a cat. You know, there can be different ways to play the game. You don't have to forgo your own value. Like I have a different set of rules to play. I didn't play like them because, first of all, sometimes I don't have that condition. I'm not from Big Four. You know, that's a different thing. You have to recognize what are you weak at. You don't target your weakness, but you go for your strength. And then my strength is to my people. My membership is my strength. You know, there are different ways I can create values for them. So you go for different ways. That's, I think, back to, you know, Sarah was talking about innovation. That's about creativity. So you don't have, and also, game change with times. You know, this set of rules somebody played really well in 1970s may not be the same rule, the way they play. So I think that's to recognize it. And then secondly is the employer, because it's so important. When I was the auditor, computer auditor in Manchester, and I remember I went to this award-winning, and when I went into this, wow, the place is great. You know, there's a very big space, even for a secretary, even for a junior clerk, big space, and more impressive, they have a nursery. People bring the kids to go to work and then get the kids to bring. This is 1980s, and they have the lowest turnover. It goes back to some of the things they say. The lady may have some physical restraint, but the lowest turnover, and the employers say that they are really good, have highly productive staff, lowest turnover, and that may compensate some of the costs that they pay for other means. So I just want to put that in perspective, and this is such a diversity, really well, but we need to change with times. We have to be creative, and different scenario, you do different things. Thank you, but don't forgo your value.
So I think these are very difficult and complex topics, and when we discuss this, our intention is not, and we probably cannot solve these problems today. But I think the worth of it is to sit here and have that discussion, and continue to have that discussion so that one day we can find a solution. We can find and reach gender equality and make this world a better place. So at the beginning I said, what is HeforShe? If you've never heard of it, HeforShe is a United Nations movement. I checked this morning. China is actually very low on that movement. So go to the website, China for HeforShe. It doesn't mean you have to do anything. It just means you support this and you're willing to engage in this conversation as we all try to make the world a better place. So let's thank our panelists and for their excellent comments and their time here.